Reports about Chuck Norris's public funeral have suddenly created a global wave of shock, where people are reacting as if a legendary figure has already been given a final farewell. Yet the most important question is whether this public funeral actually exists, or if it has become a viral narrative that feels real without confirmation. Hawaii is being repeatedly mentioned, mourning is being discussed, and across social media it appears as if everything has already been confirmed, but when you start looking closely at the details, clarity slowly turns into confusion, and that confusion is where this entire story begins to shift. This is not just a story about a funeral, it is a story about how information spreads so fast that people begin to believe first, and only later realize that verification was missing from the very beginning. Claims suggest that a public farewell is being organized for Chuck Norris, where fans and major figures from the industry are expected to gather and pay their respects, yet there is no solid official statement that clearly confirms these claims. There is no confirmed venue, no exact timing, and no direct announcement from the family, which is highly unusual for someone of such global stature, because events of this scale normally come with detailed and transparent information. And this is exactly where a silent doubt begins to form, because the bigger the news, the clearer the information should be, but in this case, the information becomes more vague as the story spreads further. The entire narrative stands on another claim that Chuck Norris passed away on March 19 in Hawaii due to a sudden medical emergency, and this claim has become the foundation of everything that follows, including the idea of a public funeral. His age is being reported as 86, and the situation is described as sudden and unexpected, which naturally increases the emotional weight of the story and makes people more likely to accept it without questioning. But when the cause of death is reduced to a vague medical emergency, without any detailed explanation, it creates a gap that quietly pushes the audience to start wondering what the actual truth might be. There is no detailed medical report, no hospital confirmation, and no official documentation publicly available, which makes the situation even more unclear, especially for a figure whose life has always been in the public eye. This kind of incomplete information usually appears when either the facts are not fully known or when the narrative itself is not fully verified, and both possibilities lead to the same outcome: uncertainty. And this is the exact moment where the audience subconsciously begins to question the story, even if they continue watching, because something about the situation does not fully connect. Now the focus shifts to the core element that made this entire narrative viral, the idea of a public funeral, which acts as the emotional center of the story and gives it a sense of finality. Some claims suggest a large-scale public farewell, while others describe it as a private ceremony, and this contradiction creates a tension that keeps the audience engaged because they are trying to understand which version is true. This confusion between public and private is not just a detail, it is the exact reason why the story feels both believable and questionable at the same time, and that balance is what keeps people watching. If this were truly a public funeral, there would normally be clear arrangements, official schedules, security details, and confirmed guest lists, but none of these elements are clearly available or verified. Despite this, people continue posting messages of mourning, sharing tributes, and reacting emotionally as if the event has already taken place, which shows how powerful the narrative has become. This raises a simple but powerful question: are people reacting to an actual confirmed event, or to a version of reality that has been shaped by repetition and emotion? At this point, the story takes a critical turn because the focus is no longer just on the funeral, but on the reality behind the narrative and how it is being constructed. Is it possible that a public funeral with no official confirmation can start to feel real simply because it is repeated across multiple platforms, by multiple voices, in a consistent way? And if that is the case, then this is not just a rumor, it is a perfectly structured viral narrative that is influencing how people perceive truth itself. To understand why this story is so powerful, it is important to understand who Chuck Norris really is, beyond just the headlines and viral claims. Born as Carlos Ray Norris, his early life was marked by financial struggles, family instability, and a background that did not suggest he would one day become a global icon. His life changed direction when he joined the United States Air Force, where he was stationed in Korea and began learning martial arts, a decision that would eventually define his entire future. Martial arts became more than a discipline for him, it became his identity, leading him to win multiple championships and establish himself as a dominant force in competitive fighting. He later opened training schools, taught students, and even trained celebrities, expanding his influence beyond sports and into the wider world of entertainment and culture. This phase of his life was not just about success, it was about transformation from an unknown individual into a figure who would soon gain international recognition. His breakthrough moment came when he worked alongside Bruce Lee, which introduced him to a global audience and marked the beginning of his transition into film. From there, he built a strong presence in action cinema, starring in films that emphasized discipline, strength, and justice, qualities that became closely associated with his image. Movies like The Delta Force and Missing in Action did not just make him popular, they turned him into a symbol of a certain type of hero that audiences connected with deeply. His influence expanded even further with television, particularly through Walker, Texas Ranger, where he became a household name across multiple generations. The show reinforced his image as a figure of authority, discipline, and moral clarity, making him more than just an actor and turning him into a representation of strength in popular culture. Because of this, his identity moved beyond the screen and became something that people recognized instantly, even outside the context of entertainment. When a personality of this magnitude becomes the subject of tribute narratives, it is almost inevitable that major names will be associated with the story, including Arnold Schwarzenegger and Dolph Lundgren. These tributes describe him as an icon, a legend, and a role model, which reinforces the emotional impact of the narrative and makes it feel more authentic to the audience. However, even here, the same pattern appears again. The statements feel powerful and convincing, but their verification is not clearly established. Similarly, figures like Sylvester Stallone and George W. Bush are also linked to this mourning narrative, further strengthening its credibility in the eyes of the audience. When multiple high-profile personalities appear within the same story, it creates a strong sense of social proof, making the narrative feel more real than it might actually be. And this is exactly how viral stories gain momentum, not just through information, but through association with trusted and recognizable names. There is another important layer to this situation. Chuck Norris has been the subject of multiple death hoaxes in the past, where similar stories spread rapidly across the internet and were later proven false. Each time, the pattern has been almost identical: a sudden death claim, emotional tributes, and rapid global circulation, which makes the current situation feel familiar to those who have seen it before. This history adds complexity to the narrative because it forces the audience to question whether they are witnessing a real event or a repetition of a pattern that has already occurred multiple times. This leads to a deeper and more critical question: is this public funeral appearing real because of actual evidence, or because repeated emotional content is shaping perception and creating belief? Are people reacting to verified facts, or are they responding to a carefully structured narrative that is designed to trigger emotional engagement and immediate acceptance? And this is the psychological point where the line between belief and reality begins to blur, making it increasingly difficult to separate fact from assumption. The legacy of Chuck Norris extends far beyond films or martial arts. It is a global cultural presence that has influenced generations and shaped how action heroes are perceived. He helped bring martial arts into mainstream entertainment, defined a certain era of action cinema, and created a persona that became instantly recognizable worldwide. His influence is so strong that even internet culture transformed him into a larger-than-life figure through viral memes, adding another layer to his already powerful identity. Because of this, any news connected to his name carries immediate emotional weight, regardless of whether it is verified or not, because people already have a strong connection to his image. A single narrative can trigger global reactions simply because of the strength of his identity and the familiarity people feel toward him. And perhaps that is the most powerful aspect of his legacy, that his name alone is enough to influence how people think, react, and respond on a global scale. In the end, the real question is not whether Chuck Norris's public funeral has taken place. The real question is how quickly the world accepted the idea without confirmation and turned it into a shared belief. A narrative that feels real can often be more powerful than reality itself, especially when it is supported by repetition, emotion, and recognizable figures. And this is where the story reaches its final point. Sometimes the impact of a legend is so strong that even an unverified farewell can feel completely real to the entire world.